All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Is it good morning? In my country, it is. So I'm still in the time zone shift. I'm based out of India. It was a 22-hour flight here, but I'm glad to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining me for this session, VMM 2008 R2 to VMM 2012, Things You Need to Know. My name is Iftikhar Hussain. I'm a technology specialist in Microsoft. I work primarily with Microsoft partners, helping them design, develop, sell, even deploy Microsoft virtualization solutions to our customers. Before we get started, let me thank you for choosing this session over all the other great sessions that are happening right now. So thanks for being here. And I would like to know how many of you are using VMM 2008 R2 today in production today? Okay. And how many of you have already started using VMM 2012 in production? Okay, I guess we'll all have something to take away from this session. Let us quickly run through some of the session objectives and takeaways. So one of the objectives here is to give you a 200-level technical overview of some of the advanced management capabilities that VMM 2012 has to offer. Of course, tied back to some of the technical pain points that we have today in our data centers, and help you to deploy or upgrade to VMM 2012 with minimum effort. The key takeaway would be to get an understanding of some of these new advanced management capabilities of Virtual Machine Manager and to do an end-to-end management of your virtualized infrastructure and, of course, take that next step to the private cloud. Let us quickly run through the agenda or the topics that we're going to cover today. We'll start off with a brief introduction to VMM 2012, and we'll see what kind of role it plays in today's evolving IT. We'll talk about some of the host management capabilities of Virtual Machine Manager, for example, bare metal deployment, cluster management, power optimization, and dynamic optimization. We'll talk about some of the fabric management concepts that VMM 2012 has brought in with respect to logical networks, load balancer integration, and storage automation. We'll also see what are the other necessary steps that you need to take to construct a private cloud using VMM 2012. We'll also look into some of the deployment planning options and, of course, the upgrade considerations. At the end of the session, we'll also look into some of the enhancements that are made to VMM 2012 RTM based on the feedback that we have received from you all during our beta program. So let's get started. So let me begin with this definitive evolution that's happening within IT. Customers are telling us that they are increasingly considering adopting different cloud models instead of running everything off virtualized or physical infrastructure. Close to 40% of our customers are already using services across different data centers, either on premises or in the public cloud. And they want something in the middle where they can offer infrastructure as a service or IT as services to their internal organization, to the internal customers, internal business units. We here in Microsoft believe that a hybrid model would be a norm over the next few years, and an integrated tool set which can provide an integrated management of physical, virtual, private cloud, and public cloud would be a key, and it will help you to optimize your return on investment. Let's see what kind of role Virtual Machine Manager plays here. Virtual Machine Manager 2012, with its advanced provisioning capabilities, allow you to pool and abstract your resources like compute, network, storage into data center fabric. To leverage your existing data center investments, Virtual Machine Manager 2012 now supports Citrix infrastructure as well, along with VMware infrastructure. And of course, Hyper-V infrastructure is always there. Virtual Machine Manager 2012 allows you to easily allocate all your pooled data center resources to your internal users, to your internal customers, your internal business units, using some of the control delegation capabilities which it has to offer. Virtual Machine Manager 2012 also enables you to provision and maintain your generalized application services to private cloud. Server AppV technology, which is built into the VMM 2012 server, allows you to abstract your application from the underlying operating system or underlying physical infrastructure, which further allows you to easily upgrade and update your application services. Virtual Machine Manager 2012 also provides you a dynamic optimization solution to your data center resources, where all data center resources can be pooled and can be managed automatically. Of course, it also provides you a highly available infrastructure by itself, which you can rely on for your private cloud solution. Virtual Machine Manager 2012 has a deeper integration or deeper support to industry standards like IPMI, SMASH, SMIS, PowerShell, OVF. So you can see Virtual Machine Manager 2012 allows you to deliver IT as a services to your internal organization using some of these capabilities at a in a cost-effective way. You probably have seen this architecture before with respect to VMM 2008 R2 who are already using today VM 2000 R2 today in the environment. You can see some new entries here. We now integrate with Windows WSUS server. We'll talk about what kind of capabilities it brings on the table in a while. We also integrate with Windows deployment services. We'll also talk about that, why Windows deployment services is needed and what it does when it integrates with VMM. And we have a new member to manage. We now manage Citrix Xen Server and Citrix Xen Server cluster, and in the same way like we manage Hyper-V and VMware infrastructure. But we don't have any dependency on Citrix management console. Let's talk about some of the host management capabilities of Virtual Machine Manager 2012. Now, I work with a lot of customers, a lot of partners, and there are a lot of feedbacks that we get from our customers. One of the feedback was that I have to use multiple tools to manage multiple infrastructure or multiple components of my server lifecycle. I have to use different tools to manage physical hosts. I have to use different tools to manage my virtual machines. I have to use different tools to manage my applications and services running inside those virtual machines. We try to solve some of these kind of problems with VM 2012. VM 2012 now just don't manage your virtual machines anymore. It goes even further. It even manages your physical servers, which you need to deploy to be able to run virtual machines on. With bare metal Hyper-V deployment, we solve certain problems. Like today, provisioning a virtual machine is pretty easier with VMM. But when it comes to provisioning bare metal Hyper-V servers, it's still a challenge. It still takes a lot of time to provision new servers to be able to run virtual machines on. Virtual Machine Manager with its bare metal deployment can now integrate with your WDS server and can trigger bare metal deployment of your new servers. Let's see how it does that. All right, so VMM server can now communicate with the board management controller of your bare metal server using protocols like IPMI and SMASH. Even if you have any custom ILO, it can even support that. It does an out-of-band reboot of that bare metal server. Bare metal server will go ahead and communicate through PXE, and it communicates to the WDS server. WDS server in return communicates with VMM server to authorize this particular PXE boot. And then WDS server sends a customized WIMP image onto that Hyper-V server. And this WIMP image is customized to work with VMM server for further deployment. It runs GC scripts to configure partitions. Once that is done, Virtual Machine Manager from its library server then pushes a VHD file which has a full-fledged operating system on it. Now you can see here that we are not deploying operating systems natively on that particular box, but we are just deploying a VHD file which already has an operating system. So it can reduce your deployment time of an operating system to a great extent. We configured the boot configuration manager to boot into the VHD instead of installing the operating system natively on that hardware. We inject the drivers based on the plug-and-play IDs, and then we run the operating system customization and add that particular Hyper-V server or bare metal server to your domain. Once it's added to the domain, Virtual Machine Manager installs the VMM agent on top of it to be able to do further actions like enable Hyper-V role or adding it to a host groups. Once it's added, once the VMM agent is there, it also runs further customization to be able to configure certain components of that physical server, like enabling the RDP stack. So you can see that Virtual Machine Manager is not managing your VM anymore. It can now help you to deploy your Hyper-V servers even faster. So it solves a lot of problems here. Next challenge, once the Hyper-V server is deployed, the next management challenge that comes into picture is creation of clusters. What we do today with VMM 2008 R2, in order to create a cluster, we first connect to a failover cluster manager of that host. Even before creating a cluster, we first configure storage, configure networking, We need to ensure that we have networks for live migration and cluster communication. And then comes to cluster manager, create clusters. Once the cluster creation is done, then come back to virtual machine manager 2008 R2, add that cluster so that that cluster can be used to deploy virtual machines on. With VM 2008 R2, with VM 2012, now you can create clusters right from the same console without even connecting to that Hyper-V host. It's simple wizard-based experience. You can even run the cluster validation wizard from there itself. You don't even have to connect to the host server to run that wizard. Of course, you have an option to skip that cluster validation wizard so that you can perform it later on demand. However, if you're deploying clusters in production, it is highly recommended that you run the cluster validation wizard right there. You can even allocate cluster disks to your clusters if your VMM is managing your storage. We'll talk about how VMM can manage your storage in a while, but just to give you an overview, you don't even have to mask or unmask your storage before creation of cluster. You can do that from the console itself. One of the challenges that we face today is about creating cluster-wide virtual network. So if you have an 8-node or 16-node clusters, you have to actually get into each and every host and configure virtual LAN or virtual network on each and every host. That has to be identical. It has to be, it is even case sensitive. So there's a huge scope of human error. With VMM 2012, now you can create cluster-wide network from the same console without having to go to each and every host and configure that manually. You cannot just create cluster, you can even manage it. You can even remove a couple of nodes, you can add new nodes, you can create cluster shared volumes, you can remove cluster shared volumes and all of that. You can even destroy a cluster. If you have a cluster and you want that entire clusters to be destroyed and convert them into a standalone Hyper-V host, you can now do that seamlessly from the console itself. Let's see some of the screenshots, how it's done. So you can see here that you have an option of Hyper-V, create Hyper-V clusters. You can specify a runners account, which generally which holds or stores your credentials so that you don't have to supply them every other time. You can add your nodes. You can even skip cluster validation wizard, cluster validation tests, however, not recommended in production. You can specify a static IP address for your cluster from there itself. We also have a concept of static pool, which we're going to talk about in a while, which is generally, which is nothing but as creating a pool of your static IP addresses and managing it in the same way how DHCP manages it to, for its dynamic addresses. So you can also take one of the IP addresses from your static IP address pool and dedicate that to your cluster IP address. You can see the status of the cluster, what is the status and what is the progress of this whole cluster creation. And once the cluster is created, you can run a validation test on demand. And you can even browse to the test and see the outcome. So that was all about the cluster creation. So for administrators who are using Virtual Machine Manager 2008 R2 today, it can solve a whole lot of, it can reduce a whole lot of time managing and creation of cluster out of the band. The next management challenge that comes into the picture after the cluster is done, a cluster is created, is updating or patching those clusters. SCCM or WSUS does provide us that core level patching solution, but when it comes to patching those servers which are participating in a cluster and which are running virtual machines on top of it, is not always adequate. We need something to orchestrate the entire cluster patching without any kind of service interruption. Now, what we do today with VMM 2008 R2, if I need to patch cluster host, I need to connect to that VM, connect to that host, do the live migration, or evacuate all the virtual machines, put that particular host in the maintenance mode, do all the patching and updating, reboot the server if required, and then bring it back out of the maintenance mode, and then do the exact same thing on the other servers. Think of if you have an 8-node or 16-node cluster, you literally have to babysit the entire operation or entire activity for the entire day probably. With Virtual Machine Manager, now you can patch or update those clusters in a more orchestrated way by its integration with WSUS server. So let's see how that works. So you enable this feature by adding a WSUS server in your environment. You can pretty much use your existing WSUS server, which you're already probably using with Configuration Manager. You just simply run a small wizard which connects to WSUS server. Once you added a WSUS server, it downloads all the update catalog, and then you create baselines. So baselines are those mandatory updates that you would like all your cluster hosts to have. Once you create those baselines, you run a scan on those servers using the VMM console. When you run a scan, your virtual machine manager compares all the existing updates that are installed on that server with the updates which are available in the baseline to see if there is any gap. And if there is any gap, virtual machine manager will come up that these are the hosts which are non-compliant. And if you see some of those hosts are non-compliant, you will have an option to do the remediation right there itself, or you can automate that using PowerShell. Once you remediate that server, once you right-click and click remediate, virtual machine manager will evacuate all the virtual machines from that box to other hosts in the cluster. It will put that particular host in the maintenance mode. It will do all the patching. It will configure the Windows Update agent to connect to the right WSUS server, and it will install all those missing patches, and it will even reboot the server if necessary. Once the server is rebooted, once it joins domain again, it will take it out of the maintenance mode and then do the exact same thing on the other host. So in an 8-node cluster, if all the 8 nodes are out of compliant, it will keep on doing it until the entire cluster is up to date without causing any kind of service interruption. So as an administrator, you can also save a lot of time there, where virtual machine manager is doing the entire automated update management of your clusters. Of course, you can also manage some exceptions where you don't really want certain updates to get installed on certain hosts, or you don't really want to reboot certain hosts in certain scenarios. You can always do that. Some of the concerns that we also heard from our customers, that with respect to applications, that at the end of each quarter, my finance application require more resources, but other times it's mostly idle. I would like to ensure that all my application gets all the resources that they need when they need them, and I just can't watch it all the time. They also have concern about the energy wastage. If I'm not using certain resources, I don't want to power it on. I should be able to power it off, and I can always power it on whenever the requirement arises. To cater some of these problems, Virtual Machine Manager brings dynamic optimization. Now, today we are using something called Pro Tips, where we integrate Virtual Machine Manager 2008 R2 with Operations Manager. And it does provide a similar feature where we can move around virtual machines from one box to another in the event of any kind of resource crunch on that host. So now that feature of dynamic optimization is out of the box. You don't need any kind of integration with Operations Manager. So that does reduce some complexity when you need a dynamic optimization of your cluster. So it looks for CPU, memory, disk I/O, and network I/O. So you can configure certain thresholds. For example, you don't really want your host to go when it comes to CPU to go beyond 90% of CPU utilization. And if that ever happens, Virtual Machine Manager should trigger optimization and move a couple of virtual machines from that box to the other host in the cluster where enough resources are available to reduce the load on that box, to be able to manage and do a load balancing of the entire cluster. It is not just limited to Hyper-V. You can even do this dynamic optimization on VMware servers, VMware clusters using vMotions, and Zen cluster as well using ZenMotion. So all VMware customers or all VMware users, you can go ahead and try switching off your DRS and see how dynamic optimization works for you. You can configure manual or automatic option. So if you don't really want your optimization to kick in automatically after a certain period of time, you can also disable that. If you just want to have it on demand. You can also control the frequency. By default, the frequency is 10 minutes, that every 10 minutes it will check for any disbalanced load and it will try to optimize it, but you can also go ahead and change that depending upon your requirement. You also have an option to configure aggressiveness. So if you set the aggressiveness to the maximum, Virtual Machine Manager will try to optimize a cluster even if a small gain can be achieved. But if you set it to a lower end, it will only try to optimize a cluster whenever a considerable amount of gain can be achieved by moving around virtual machines. Let's see how it does. So here in this graphical diagram, graphical representation, I have a 3-node cluster, a couple of virtual machines running on them. I have set an optimization threshold. Now this optimization threshold could be a CPU, memory, disk I/O, or even network I/O. For this example, let's take it at CPU threshold. So one of the physical hosts is showing that the CPU utilization has gone beyond threshold. Virtual Machine Manager will trigger dynamic optimization, and it will move a couple of virtual machines off that box to the other box in the cluster where enough resources are available. This way, your cluster will automatically come to an optimized state. Maybe later that day, the third box goes beyond threshold, again the CPU threshold. Virtual Machine Manager will then again trigger optimization, and then it will move that virtual machine or live migrate that virtual machine from that box to the other box in the cluster to ensure that the optimization, that the load or that the cluster is completely optimized. So it will keep on happening until and unless your cluster is completely optimized. It will also ensure that while moving the virtual machine to other box, it is not violating the dynamic optimization threshold. So you will not see a scenario where your virtual machines are doing ping pong from one of the boxes. So it will also ensure that. We extended the dynamic optimization feature to power optimization, where you can now save power by shutting down a couple of servers if your load is not that much. So what Virtual Machine Manager does, it will see if the load or utilization of one of the server has gone below threshold. It will try to consolidate all your virtual machines onto fewer hosts and shut down a couple of hosts to save power. And when the load increases, it will automatically turn on that virtual machine or to turn on that physical server and then spread out all the virtual machine to balance the load again. Again, it's not just limited to Hyper-V environment. You can also do it for your VMware cluster and Zen server cluster as well. It is only enabled when you put your dynamic optimization in automatic mode. If it's not in automatic mode, power optimization will not kick in. You have an option where you can specify during what hours of the day you want your power optimization to function. There may be scenarios you probably don't want your servers to shut down and turn on during the peak hours of your working days. You probably want to do it during the weekends or during the long holidays. You also have an option. Of course, we just talked about that. You can set it. You can only do it. Only enable it when your dynamic optimization is in automated mode. It also ensures that while shutting down a server, it should not again violate the dynamic optimization threshold on the other boxes. So again, that will not happen, that your servers keep on shutting down and turning on by itself, during frequent intervals. So it will also ensures that. It leverages those out-of-band management controllers available on your bare metal servers like IPM and Smash. So it leverages those out-of-band protocols to manage that power off and on function. Let's see how it's done. So again, a 3-node cluster. The resource utilization on one of the box goes below a threshold. Virtual Machine Manager will trigger power optimization, and it will turn off that device after live migrating all the virtual machines from it. Maybe later part of the day, when the load increases on one of the box, Virtual Machine Manager will automatically turn on this particular host, and then all the virtual machine from the other host will spread out to balance the load in the cluster. So this way you can save a lot of power during your weekends or during your long holidays where the load on these virtual machines and those servers are not that much. Let's see some of these things in action. Let me go ahead and share my desktop. All right. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is the new console of VMM 2012, and I have a cluster where I have 2 nodes in the cluster, and I'm running a couple of virtual machines. So let's go ahead and see the dynamic optimization first. So I'll go to the properties of this host group, and in the dynamic optimization setting, I can see that I have an option where I can set aggressiveness of how often you want dynamic optimization to kick in. Even if it involves a small gain, Virtual Machine Manager will go ahead and do the live migrations. You can set the thresholds, like I want the dynamic optimization to kick in if the available CPU goes below 50%. Same applies for memory, disk I/O, and network I/O. You can also set it to automate it or manually. You also have an option where you can set the time or frequency, how often the dynamic optimization should kick in. Here I have mentioned 2 minutes just for the sake of this demo, and I don't want it to automatic because I wanted to show you how it works. So let me come out of it. I'll say yes, and now I can do an optimization on demand, which was not possible with VM 2008 R2 Pro tips. So I can right click on this cluster and I can click optimize host. So if there is any disbalance, it will show us that there is a virtual machine that can be live migrated to other hosts to move or to optimize this cluster, because one of the server has a CPU utilization beyond threshold. So I can simply select this one and click optimize. What it will do, it will live migrate one of the virtual machines from that box to bring the server under the optimization threshold. So it'll take a couple of seconds here. So while we are doing that, so it's almost done. So it's kind of done. So you can see that it's not here anymore. Now that particular virtual machine is running from box number 2. So that was all dynamic optimization. You can now do dynamic optimization on demand as well, which was not possible with VM 2008 R2. The second thing I want to talk about here, or I want to show here, is about cluster management or the patch management. Now, if I click cluster here and I go here in home and fabric, and I have a compliance view where I can see what is the compliance status of my physical host with respect to updates and security patches. Now right now it's showing all my physical hosts are compliant. Let me go ahead and change the baseline. So I have already configured a baseline here in my library, which I'm going to modify it now. So I have a sample baseline for critical updates. I'm going to right click on it and go to properties. So here are all the updates which I would like to be on my host, cluster host all the time. These are some of the mandatory updates. I can add an additional update here in my baseline, and then I'm going to run the scanning again. So I'll select this one, click add, and here is assignment scope where you would like this particular baseline to be assigned to. I have already assigned it to my cluster. I'll simply click OK and come out of it. Now if I go back to my fabric and the compliance view, you can see here that it was showing compliant, by the way, in a couple of seconds from now. Now it's showing unknown because we just changed the baseline. Now I have an option to run a scan right now to see if my server or if my cluster hosts are still compliant. So it's scanning. And you can see that now since we have added a new update in the baseline, and that update is not available in that server, so it's showing us that it's non-compliant. And I can do the remediation right from here itself. Remediate, and I have an option: do not restart the server after remediation if you choose to, and it will use the live migration feature to move around virtual machines from one box to another. So there will be no service interruptions to any of your virtual machines, and I can simply click remediate. So it has started remediating this particular box. So any virtual machine which is running on this particular box will automatically live migrate itself. So it is live migrating one of the box, and it is doing the remediation. Once server is patched up with all those missing updates, server will be rebooted and it will be again joined back to the domain, and then the virtual machine manager will go ahead and do the exact same thing on the other box. It has probably it is still remediating. In a couple of seconds it will go ahead and do the exact same thing to other box as well. So think of, if you have a large cluster, 8 node, 16 node clusters, you can simply save a lot of time by just doing an orchestra update from the virtual machine manager 2012.
Put it in maintenance mode and scan as well?
Yes, it does. It does. All right. So let me go back to my PowerPoint. We'll come back here in a while.
Can you connect compliance baselines with the service manager?
You can integrate that. You can do that. All right. So let's talk about some of the fabric management concepts here with Virtual Machine Manager 2012. So another frustrated administrator. Okay. So here's a concern that if something goes wrong, I have no visibility into the underlying storage or network. I don't know how my virtual machines are connected to what network, it is connected to what storage. I don't even know if it's connected to storage number 1. If it is connected to storage number 1, where is it connected to my pool 1 or LUN 2 or LUN 3? I don't know. So if something goes wrong, it sometimes gets difficult to diagnose and troubleshoot. I have different data centers, and each of them has a different subnets and different VLANs. How can I simply deploy a VM to my production environment without knowing underlying network configuration? As a user, think of from a cloud user perspective, I just want this virtual machine to be deployed in a production environment. I don't care if it has a 10.IP address or 192.IP address. All I want that this virtual machine should be deployed in a production environment. VMM makes it easier. So networking gets easier with VMM. VMM bought this concept called logical network, which you probably already have in your environment. It's just that now you're making it official and integrating that and defining that in the VMM. It's a user-defined grouping of your IP subnets and VLANs, or both. It is an abstraction of underlying network configuration. So a couple of examples that I can think of is production network, of course, backend, front-end, where your web tier applications which are public-facing or internet-facing should go into a front-end logical network, but all your application services which communicate within, with themselves, like your .NET tier with your SQL database, should be connected to my backend network. A couple of other network that I can think, a logical network that I can think of is lab network, where I want to deploy this VM to my lab network so that it does not cause any kind of conflict with my production network. Now, if a user asks that he wants to deploy this VM onto a lab network, he doesn't want to know whether that lab network consists of 10.IP series and production network consists of 12.IP series. He just wants his virtual machine to be in a lab network so that whatever work he does should not conflict with the production environment. So you can now create logical network in the VM in 2012 in the console. We also bought static IP pool concept, where you can now manage your static IP pool, static IP addresses in the same way how DHCP manages it for its dynamic IP addresses. So how do we manage static IP addresses today? We probably use some kind of Excel sheets to check out IP addresses to give it to users. They use it for their VMs or physical hosts, but we never get it back. We don't even know if that IP address is still being used or not. With Virtual Machine Manager, now it has got streamlined, where you can create a pool of IP addresses which are static in nature, and when you deploy a VM or a resource which is going to be a server workload which normally requires a static IP address, you don't even have to get into that VM and configure the network card for static IP addresses and subnet mask and gateway and DNS. It can be automated by using that static IP pool. And when that VM gets deleted, probably the work is done, you delete that VM, that IP address will check back into your pool so that it can be reallocated. You also have an option where you can check for inactive IP addresses. For example, you may have deployed a VM using a static IP pool, but that VM got deleted out of the VMM management console. Probably you used Server Manager or Hyper-V Manager to delete that VM. Virtual Machine Manager will also ensure that if that IP address is not being used, it can be reallocated, it can be released. So you'll also have an option in VMM 2012 where you can see those inactive IP addresses and you can release them so that it can be reallocated again. So you will never lose your static IP addresses from now. We also bought a concept of adding or integrating with your load balancers. Now you would think why it is required. Think about those applications and services which require load balancing, those web tier application of your application services. You want your applications to be deployed and your load balance to be provisioned automatically to those applications. Now that can be done automatically with this integration of VM 2012 and your load balancers. In order to do that, you would require a configuration provider from those hardware or load balancer manufacturer. So we have configuration provider available from F5, Brocade, and Citrix. And of course, it's also Microsoft Network Load Balancer is also supported. The provider is already inbuilt into the VM 2012. So this is how your logical network and static IP pool architecture looks like. We have a production logical network. It can be assigned to multiple host groups. It can be even 2 different geographical locations. Each geographical locations will have probably their own IP subnets, and each IP subnets may have different static IP pool. So if I need to deploy a VM, I don't really have to worry about whether I should get a 10.IP addresses or 12.IP addresses. I should just go ahead and deploy that VM in production network, and VMM automates that placement of that virtual machine. Same here, same way you can now deploy your multi-tier application with load balancer integration. So for example, here in this web tier application, which is a web front, I would like this web tier instance to be deployed onto front-end network which consists of all public IP addresses where it can be accessed outside my company firewall. It should also be front-end by a load balancer automatically. My line of business application, my database tier, I'm fine having it on my production environment. It should not go into the front end, which it can be accessed from outside my company firewall. So now I don't really have to worry about whether I should assign a 10.IP address to my line of business application or 12.IP addresses. Virtual Machine Manager does it all by itself. So these are some of the supported load balancers, F5, Brocade, and Citrix. Microsoft Network Load Balancer support is already inbuilt. You can go to this TechNet site, where we have all the up-to-date information. You can also download the configuration provider from this TechNet link. Some more pain points. Okay, before we move further, I don't want you to think that I only work with one single customer and he has all the pain points in the world. So they are different customers. So again, no visibility into the storage. I don't know how my VMs related to underlying storage. I keep having my application owner place their applications onto one of my expensive SAN, which is probably meant for some business critical application. How can I streamline that allocation of storage to my users depending upon the service levels, depending upon the performance expectations? I want to automate certain storage tasks, especially those silly tasks, or not, I should not say silly, those tasks which are regular, like formatting a new LUN or creating a new LUN or masking and unmasking. I want to automate that. I don't want to spend time doing formatting and adding a volume letter to my volume. How can I do that? I don't have a time. I probably don't have that kind of expertise to go into PowerShell and do that. I want to automate that. VMM comes to the rescue. Virtual Machine Manager with its advanced storage management can now offer an end-to-end storage management capabilities. With SMIS provider available from some of these storage vendors, now you can completely manage your storage from the VMM console itself. Couple of things, you can do a lot of stuff from there. Couple of things that I would like to point out here. You can do an end-to-end mapping. Virtual Machine Manager can see what kind of storage you have, who is the manufacturer, what is the capacity of the storage, how many pools you have created, how many LUNs you have, what is the capacity of that LUN, what kind of iSCSI target and initiator is going to be involved, how to unmask and mask those storage. Everything can be done from the VMM console. So you can do an end-to-end mapping. You can trigger rapid provisioning of your virtual machine using the LUN cloning technology or snapshot technology offered by your SAN manufacturer. You can do the cluster storage management. Now you don't even have to go to those iSCSI initiator and connect to your storage before creating a cluster. Virtual Machine Manager can automatically unmask those storage before you create a cluster from the console itself, so that you don't really have to manage multiple tools. We have an extensive area support. We cover almost 80% of storage vendors out there, and they already have SMIS provider, which I'm going to show you what all storage are supported so far. You can create storage classification depending upon the service level or performance expectation. For example, all my expensive SANs, so I've got 2 expensive SANs, they have a huge I/O capability. I would like to tag them as platinum storage, and I would only give this platinum storage to those users or those applications where IOPS huge number of IOPS is required. I don't want to give this huge, this expensive SAN storage to my lab user, who just want to create a VM to test Windows 8 on top of it. So you can also create that kind of classification for better administration of your storage infrastructure. So of course, there are a lot of things to talk about. Tomorrow we have a session by Hector Linares tomorrow at 11:45, where we will be doing a deep dive on some of these things, and we'll show a lot of cool demos there. So please, join that session if you are really interested in the storage automation piece of it. So you can see some of these capabilities of storage automation helps you to get a better insight, onto your storage. Things that you couldn't do earlier, now you can do easily with VMM 2012, and of course it offers storage at your own terms. Here are some of the SMIS providers that are available from some of these vendors. Couple of vendors, they have a SMIS provider, but their validation with VMM is still in progress. You can go through this TechNet list, TechNet site, where we will keep on updating all these SMIS provider and their download links. So this is the current status right now. We have SMIS provider from Hitachi and Fujitsu. It's just that the validation is still in progress. And Starwind has just come up with the SMIS provider development. All right, let's go back to our demo environment and let's see some of these things in action. All right, so you can see that our cluster is now compliant, so good news. So I'll come back to my fabric, and the first thing that I'm going to do is create a logical network. So I have a couple of logical network already created, like external, front, and Redmond. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a logical network called lab network, where my lab users can deploy their applications and VMs without doing any kind of conflict with my production environment. So I'll right click here, and I'm going to name it as lab network. Now I have to provide a network definition and network site where this lab network will be applicable. So I only want this lab network to be applicable to my Bangalore host group, all the servers which are there in this particular host group. I can insert a VLAN and IP subnet. Next, I'm done. And now all I have to do, so this is my lab network. Now I can go ahead and create static IP pool in this lab network. So whenever a user is deploying a VM onto on this particular network, it will automatically be configured with the static IP addresses from my static IP pool that I'm going to create right now. So I'll right click here and create pool. So I'm going to use the same lab network site. I can specify the IP address start range and stop range. I can even reserve an IP addresses for my VIP or virtual IP addresses, which will be used by my load balancers. So load balancers can also have, you can also tie your load balancers to certain logical networks, so that if you want your load balancer to pick up an IP address from a certain logical network, then you can do it here itself, and you can actually reserve those IP addresses for the load balancer itself. I'm not going to do that here, so I can insert a gateway if you want. And I can insert a DNS IP addresses. So all this will be automatically configured within your virtual machines. You don't even have to get into VM and configure the virtual network card in there. I don't have VINs, summary, and I'm done. Now I just have to create a virtual machine, and I just have to pick up lab network, and virtual machine manager will take care where this particular virtual machine to be deployed. It should be deployed only in the Bangalore host group where this lab network is available. So it will take care of that. You don't really have to worry about that particular VM should not come into your production network. Now the next thing I want to show you here is integration of storage. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to a storage provider. So I'll go ahead and connect to my storage. Here I already have installed my SMIS pack or SMIS provider. Not using SSL. I'll use a credential. I'll use storage admin, which has the required credential to be able to, which can connect to my storage device. I'll click next, and it will scan for that storage device. So you can see it's a EMC storage. It has a couple of pools. It has a storage array number, and it has a capacity. Like if I go next, I will have an option to allocate these pool into multiple classifications. So this is a smaller pool, so I would like it to give it a silver classification. Little bigger pool, a gold classification, and pool number 3, which has a maximum capacity, I would like to give it a platinum capacity, platinum classification. But again, you can change it according to your requirement. If you want your high-end SANs to go into platinum, you can do that. Here, I'm just trying to classify in that fashion where if a user asks for smaller LUNs, I will give him a silver SAN. If I ask for a bigger LUNs, I will give him a platinum, and so on. Next, and you can create your own classification. These are classifications which I created on my own. You can create your own classification by anything. So I'll say yes, click next and finish. And you can see here now I'll have all my arrays in a pool. I will have multiple pools here, and even have a silver pool here. So that's how you integrate a storage into your VMM, and then VMM will allocate the storage to your host groups depending upon the requirements. Next thing I want to show is integrating a load balancer. So I already have installed the configuration provider available from Citrix. I have a NetScaler load balancer, which I'm going to integrate that now with my VMM. So if I go here in settings and I go here in my configuration provider, I already have a Citrix NetScaler installed here. So I'll just go here and add it. Add load balancer. I'll provide it a credential which has access to connect to my load balancer. I click next. I'll specify in which host group this load balancer will be available. So let me make it available to Las Vegas. Click next. This is the manufacturer model which automatically gets populated because of the configuration provider. I'll click next, and here I will specify the IP address of my load balancer. It's running on port 80. Click next. Now here I can specify the affinity. Now this load balancer should pick up an IP address from front-end network, and it should have a backend to my Redmond network. I don't want it to go to a lab network. I click next, and here you can see it has already picked up, and I can click test, where it will actually connect to the load balancer and will run certain tests to find out what are the capabilities of this load balancer. You can see it has passed all my tests. I'll click next and finish. My load balancer is now added here. The next thing I need to do here is to allocate these resources to my host group. So I'll right click on my Las Vegas, go to properties, and I'll go to the storage, and now I allocate those storage that I just integrated. So I'll add probably the platinum pool here. Okay, and I'll also add a couple of LUNs. Then go to network. IP pool is already there. I already have these logical networks associated with this particular host group, and I also have these two load balancers allocated to these host groups. I click OK. So this is how you can go ahead and integrate your VMM to your storage infrastructure, to your load balancers, and of course you can now create IP pool and logical networks right here itself. Let us go back and let's see what else we have to talk about. Okay. So what are the next steps to the private cloud? Trust me, you're almost there. Now you've already created storage. You have added your Hyper-V host into the host groups, and you have a load balancer configured. All you have to do is just now allocate them to a certain cloud and create that abstraction and delegate capacity to that cloud, which we just did. And now we will go ahead and delegate this cloud to our users. Let's just go ahead and see how to do that. Let me come back. All right, that was fast. So now we're going to go ahead and create a private cloud. Click cloud. Here I'm going to create a cloud for my lab, not lab user. I'm going to create production, my marketing team. Click next. Now I would like all my host groups or my hosts running in Las Vegas host group should be a part of this particular cloud. Click next. And what all logical networks will be available? I'll make it both, because I want certain applications to go into front end and certain applications to go into the back end, which is my Redmond network. Click next. I will like my Citrix NetScaler load balancers to be available for this cloud. And I don't have a VIP profile, but I have a storage. And I want my Platinum storage to be available for this cloud, because here my marketing team would probably host my company's public website. Click next. I'm okay leaving the default path of my virtual machine folder. Now here I can specify capacity. So the total number of virtual machines that I can allocate. So I just want my users not to have or not to consume more than 10 virtual CPUs. I can specify it here. This particular cloud has 32 GB of memory, and if I want, I can have them all the memory, or I can restrict them to use probably just 16. So they will not be able to use more than 16 gig of memory on, even if the underlying devices or underlying host has more capacity than that. I can even do the same for the storage, and of course how many virtual machines that you can create. So a user can create that many virtual machines, even though your hosts are capable of creating more virtual machines. And the same host groups, same host and network and storage can contribute to a different cloud as well. It's not that you can create only one cloud using the same host. You can do that. You can do more than that. And I simply click next. I specify what kind of capability profile it will carry, and done. And now my private cloud is created. If I go here in the home, in my VM services, you can see that I just created a marketing private cloud. Now all I have to do now is delegate this private cloud to a certain user. So I'll go ahead and assign the cloud. I'll assign this, okay. I'll create a user. Sorry. Now, it's going to be a delegated administrator or read-only or self-service user. Now, I would like him to use, it's really a delegated user so that it can deploy services as well. And he can also create service template by himself. So I'll click next. I'll add a user from my Active Directory. Next. And it will have access to this marketing cloud. I can even give him some runners accounts. For example, he can connect to my Citrix load balancer. He can also connect to my storage devices as well, without actually giving him credentials. So obviously, if he would require allocating LUNs to his host groups, or creating a new cluster because he's a delegated administrator, he would require those credentials. Now, without actually giving him credential, I can simply give him these runners accounts, which he can use to do those operations which requires that level of credentials. Click next and finish. Now this private cloud is done, and it has now been delegated to a certain user group who can now go ahead and create their own virtual machines or own services without calling the IT help desk every other time. All right, let's go back and let's see what else that we have to cover. All right, let's talk about deployment and upgrade. For those who are currently using VMM 2008 R2, it's a good time for you to upgrade. Let's talk about some of the installation prerequisites first. You require Wake 2.0. Unlike VMM 2008 R2, we do not ship Wake anymore in the media, so you have to download it separately and install it on the host where you wish to install VMM server. You require .NET 3.5.1. It's already enabled in Windows Server 2008 R2. You also require PowerShell 2.0 and WinRM 2.0 as well. As far as the database is concerned, we do not support SQL Server Express anymore. You require a full-blown SQL Server 2008 and above, and SQL Server Express is not included anymore. You can have SQL Server either locally or on a remote server as well. For some of the feature of VMM 2012, you need some additional components. For example, if you want to do a bare metal provisioning, you require WDS server, which should be running on Windows Server 2008 R2. If you want an orchestrated update feature, you require WSUS server, WSUS 3.0, Service Pack 2, 64-bit. Pro isn't going anywhere. We still have Pro, where you can still integrate your Virtual Machine Manager 2012 with Operations Manager and get those and to be able to use those management packs or Pro-enabled management packs available from your hardware vendor to be able to take corrective actions based on certain thresholds or based on certain activities. So for Pro, you require Operations Manager 2007 and above. To be able to manage your Citrix Zen server, you require Citrix Integration Suite for SCVMM. This needs to be installed on your Citrix server, on your Citrix Zen server. Of course, for storage automation, we talked about it. You require SMIS provider. It needs to be installed on your storage server. For load balance integration, you require a custom provider. We have it from F5, Citrix, and Brocade, and this needs to be installed on your VMM server itself. For the power management feature or power optimization and operating system deployment, Virtual Machine Manager communicates with the board management controller of your physical server. So if those servers are using industry standards IPMI and Smash, no action is required because that support is inbuilt into the VMM. But if it's required, if it has some sort of custom ILO, then that provider needs to be installed on the VMM server itself. Here are the supported path, upgrade path. So we only support upgrade from N-1 version. So if you have Virtual Machine Manager 2008 R2 with Service Pack 1, then you can do an in-place upgrade. If you have any lower version, even if you have VMM 2008 R2, you would first have to come to Service Pack 1 level, and then you can do an in-place upgrade. We don't support upgrade from VMM 2012 Beta or RC unless you are a TAP customer. But the only upgrade path that is supported by Microsoft Product Support Team is VMM 2008 R2 SP1 to VMM 2012 RTM. All right, let's talk about upgradation for those who are running 2008 R2 today. First of all, make sure your SQL database is supported. More often than not, you're probably using a SQL Server Express or SQL Server 2005. If you have any SQL Server 2005 instance, you would first have to upgrade your SQL Server in place to SQL Server 2008, or you can take a backup of the database, install a new SQL Server 2008 or above, and then move that database or restore that database onto the new server, new SQL Server, and then use this SQL Server with your VMM 2012 installation. While installation, VMM 2012 will automatically upgrade the database to be able to work with VMM 2012. SQL Server Express is not supported anymore, so you will have to create a new SQL Server 2008 or above. You can now do an in-place upgrade of VMM 2008 R2 SP1 to a VMM 2012 high available VM instance. So in this graphical representation, let's say I have a server 2008 R2 running VMM 2008 R2 SP1 server and admin console, and I have a VMM 2008 R2 SP1 database. Now, in order to upgrade it to a high available VMM, I have to first create an Active Directory group for my distributed key management if you wish to install your certificate keys in your Active Directory. Then you bring a new server in your environment, again have the same operating system because you will be doing a clustering between them. You install all your VMM 2012 prerequisites on both the box, and then you set up clustering between these two boxes by creating a cluster resource. Once your clustering is done, then you can simply do an in-place upgrade by using your VMM to 2012 media onto the box number 1 where you are already running 2008 R2 SP1. It will detect and it will tell you that setup is running in a cluster mode. Do you want to install VMM 2012 in a highly available mode? And you say yes. Then you come to the second box. Okay, so it will upgrade your existing VMM 2008 R2 SP1 to VMM 2012. And of course, it will also upgrade your database. And your VMM encryption keys goes to your Active Directory now. On the second server, you would do the same. You take the media, you install VMM 2012, and then you get this prompt. A highly available VMM is detected. Would you like to add this as an additional node or a passive node to this highly available VMM instance? You say yes, and then this particular instance becomes a passive node. And now you have a highly available VMM infrastructure. In the console, you can see which particular instance is currently active and which of the instance is currently passive. So you can even see that. So this is how you upgrade your existing 2008 R2 VMM to a highly available VMM 2012. Some of the components upgrade. For VMM console, you can do a simple in-place upgrade using the new media. For self-service portal, so if you have a client machine, if you have a server where you're running self-service portal separately, make sure that self-service portal is VMM 2008 R2 SP1. If it is, you can do an in-place upgrade, or you can simply uninstall the self-service portal and install a new one using the new media. For all host agents, for all the host servers that you're managing today with your VMM 2008 R2 will be supported N-2 versions. So when you do an in-place upgrade, at the end of the wizard, you will have this option where you will have an option where you can reassociate all your hosts to the VMM 2012. Reassociation is mandatory. If you don't do it, Virtual Machine Manager will not be able to manage those hosts. So you need to reassociate all your existing hosts to VM 2012. And when you do that, all your host agents will show update needed. So in a column, you will see all the host agents requires update needed. You will have an option to multi-select all the hosts, right-click and do update agent, and all the hosts will now have a newer VM 2012 agents on those box. If you're managing any servers or managing any hosts in the DMZ environment or in an unclustered environment, you would have to remove them and add them again into your VM 2012 infrastructure. Same things applies for library agents as well. It's no different than any host agents. So it's same way you have to just reassociate them to your VMM server and update the agent. Some caveats. We do not support Virtual Server 2005 anymore. So if you have Virtual Server 2005 that you're currently managing with VMM 2008 R2SP1, it will no longer be carried forward. So it will be removed automatically. So make sure that you remove them voluntarily. We do not support VMware vCenter version lower than 4.1, and we don't even support ESX hosts lower than 3.5. So make sure that you take care of these things when you move away from 2008 R2SP1 to VM 2012. And we have an upgrade compatibility wizard which actually tell you about it. All right.
What about vCenter 5?
We will support vCenter 5. vCenter 5, we have not yet started supporting vCenter 5, the current version, but there will be an update for that. So let's talk about what's new in VM 2012 RTM. So these are some of the enhancements that are made to VM 2012 based on the feedback that we have received from you all during our beta program and during release candidate time frame. ISO or CD based operating system deployment. So if you don't have a WDS server, you still want your virtual machine manager to be able to deploy a Hyper-V host, you can create a custom Wimpy image on ISO and you can boot that server from that, and then VMM takes over and the VMM will do the further installation of VHD file and all of that. Again, DHCP is still required for that. During OSD, you can now keep the VHD as dynamic, which was not present, which was not available during the beta program, it was mandatory to have a fixed disk. Now you can even keep it dynamic, which will reduce your operating system deployment time to a great extent. However, if you're deploying host servers in your production, it is highly recommended that you create VHD as fixed disk so that you get a better performance from that underlying disk that you have. You can now create answer files in your host profiles, which will enable settings like RDP controller or RDP settings on your host servers. And you can also do custom code command execution, which will configure a network controller after the operating system is deployed. These features were not available during the beta program. Some of the enhancements, cluster management. Now we give you option to skip the validation wizard. It was not there in the beta phase. It was kind of mandatory. Now it's optional. But again, it's not optional if you're deploying it in production. It's highly recommended that you run the validation test, because otherwise the product support team from Microsoft will not support it. But yes, you will have an option to deploy cluster and then do the validation later on. You can simply do a drag and drop of your hosts to cluster, and it will automatically be added to your cluster. You can run the cluster validation wizard on time. And now we are also integrated with cluster static IP addresses to IP address pool. So if you have created a static IP pool in your VMM, you can use the same pool to assign a static IP addresses to your VMM, to your cluster as well. Update management. One of the key asks from you all to be able to share a WSUS server with configuration manager. During the beta program, we did not have that option. You have to have a dedicated WSUS server for VMM. Now you can pretty much share the same WSUS server which you're probably already using in your environment with configuration manager or as a standalone, and use the exact same one with your VMM as well. If you want to keep your SCCM, if you're using SCCM for all your centralized reporting, you can continue to do so without any kind of problem. Credential management. So like we discussed, run as accounts, which actually stores your credentials. It was not very consistent earlier, because there are certain operations which actually required your actual credentials and not run as accounts. Now we kind of made it consistent. Now any operation which requires credential will give you both the option to supply either a proper credentials or run as accounts. VMM PowerShell module can be loaded without a path now, and VMM admin console now shows which one of the instance of your VMM is active and which one of them is in the passive node if you have a highly available VMM infrastructure. Some of the network related enhancements. Now you don't need to create a network definition before you create a logical network. Earlier it was kind of mandatory. Gateway information and DNS information are not mandatory anymore. You can create a static IP pool without supplying this information. Earlier it was mandatory. It shows inactive IP addresses of a pool, as I discussed earlier. If virtual machine manager has checked out an IP address to a virtual machine or to a service and that service doesn't exist anymore, it probably had got deleted outside the VMM management, then virtual machine manager will show that these IP addresses are inactive and VMM is not managing it anymore. You will have an option to release that IP addresses so that it can be reallocated again to some other service or by deploying or by creating a new VM. We now added a configuration provider for Microsoft Load Balancer as well, so no action required in that case. It is already inbuilt into the VM 2012. And of course, we now supports VMware distributed switches as well. Some of the SCOM integration improvement, we came out with 2 sample pro-enabled management packs, cluster scale out and service scale out. So if you want to scale out your app, you scale out your cluster automatically based on certain fabric utilization or application utilization. You can use some of these management packs to be able to scale out your cluster as well as services. And 2 dynamic memory pro-enabled management pack, virtual machine memory pressure monitor and host memory over allocation monitor. So you can use this monitor to again do certain actions, certain corrective actions based on the information provided by these monitors. So to summarize, Virtual Machine Manager helps you to deliver a cost-effective IT as a services to your infrastructure by pooling all your heterogeneous resources into data center fabric and then allocating it to your internal users in the form of small clouds. So I hope this was useful for some of you. Please feel free to add your feedback, and if you have any questions, we'll be more than happy to take it now.